Worse than the rumbling, the digging, trying to unbury the buried, and the sights of wreckage and damage.
From CNN, this is The World Today, with Bernard Shaw in Washington and Catherine Crier from CNN Center in Atlanta.
Thanks for joining us. This nation's second deadliest earthquake has claimed at least 270 lives by official estimates. Along 100 miles of the San Andreas Fault, the rumbling quake damaged and destroyed hundreds of buildings, sliced gas and power lines, leaving fires in its wake. Santa Cruz was nearest the epicenter, and bridge damage is reflected there as well as in San Francisco Bay. Overall, more than 650 people have been injured, and that is not a final count. In Oakland,
the ground started just really rolling. It was almost more like water than dirt.
a roll that did not seem powerful enough to buckle a double-decked highway and bury hundreds. And in San Francisco,
we have tremors all the time, but this doesn't happen as long as I've been here for 9 years.
And geologists warn again, this was not the big one. The San Andreas Fault has lots more pent-up energy. The earthquake was felt 350 miles from its epicenter. Hit hardest during the 15 seconds that shook the bay, the Nimitz Freeway in Oakland, the double-deck superhighway that crumbled into a tomb of cement and steel at the height of rush hour. More than 3 decades old and built before the tough quake standards of today, a 1.25 mile stretch of the old Nimitz came tumbling down as the clock struck 5:04, crushing some 200 cars and their occupants. Firefighters and rescue teams are now scouring the wreck of the Nimitz, but authorities now believe no one, repeat, no one will be found alive. It is now feared, not confirmed mind you, but feared, that 250 people died beneath this section of the Nimitz. Rescue work is moving ever so slowly. Oakland officials describe this rubble as a house of cards that could collapse again at any moment. When you live through a catastrophic earthquake, you remember when life stood still, where you were. It seems life has not moved since this horror began 22 hours ago.
Everything came to a dead stop. People running in between the cars, running back to Treasure Island, screaming out, the bridge is collapsing, the bridge is collapsing. I think people were literally running for their lives. I was.
There apparently has been a major earthquake in San Francisco. We have Ken Chamberlain on the phone. Ken, what can you tell us?
A spectacular blaze near the Marina in San Francisco that sent a pillar of smoke and fire above the bay.
I spoke to a spokeswoman there at the FBI in San Francisco, and she tells CNN that, quote, part of the Bay Bridge has collapsed. She said that part of that bridge is in the water. I asked her, in which direction is the bridge? Is it going towards Oakland or coming back? She said it's the part going towards the East Bay. So the FBI tells us tonight that part of the Bay Bridge has collapsed, part of it's in the water, no word on fatals. I asked her whether the FBI had any idea of the severity of the earthquake, the magnitude. I was thinking of the Richter scale. She said, quote, it's pretty severe, it's pretty severe.
I actually thought the rear axle of the truck had been blown up because it actually rose up and down. I actually started stepping on my brakes and I said, wait a minute, it's been 40 seconds now, the truck is still leaping.
It sounded like a bomb. The whole top of the building fell off and landed right on top of these cars. There were people in them, and I guess they didn't feel the thing. They were just crushed to death. I mean, it's like pancakes.
But the search for possible survivors in all of this, and of course for confirmation of more victims, is going to take probably all day and maybe much longer than just today.
And the girl, when she came out, told me that 2 girls were down below her. They heard her talking.
There was 5 victims. Our main concern at this time is not
now we're told
seeing right in here. This area right here, there doesn't appear to be any victims.
There's been a power failure, therefore the game will be postponed. We ask that you hold on to your tickets. Green checks will be honored.
I'm scared to death. I'm still shaking. That was the worst I've ever experienced. I've never been scared by them before.
We were on the
27th floor of this building.
And it rumbled. It never stopped. And it was just
back and forth.
The most frightening thing that I've been through. It was terrible.
You
or hear when it happens?
No, I saw it all on TV.
Were you able to identify this is the place you live?
Yeah. I don't know where the other 2 floors went.
Loss of life at this point right now, the only thing that we know for sure are 2, possibly 3 additional, but again, it's all just open to speculation right now. We're not sure.
We talked with rescue workers this morning who said they will always be haunted by the screams for help that they heard while they were looking for victims in the rubble.
The search for possible victims buried in the rubble was called off at midnight for fear of the safety of the rescuers.
A lot of hurt people, yeah, scared. Some of them, I'm sure they were scared, but most of them, I guess, were happy to be alive. You know?
I think it's fair to say, and maybe an understatement, that it's going to be some time before the Bay Area is back to normal, and we're expecting it to be a rather difficult week ahead.
A fair number of Bay Area residents camped out last night. They preferred sleeping under starlit skies to staying beneath ceilings they feared might come tumbling down on them. Some folks have sought refuge in the more than 24 shelters set up by the Red Cross and other groups. Accommodations are makeshift at best in most places. Those using the facilities range from local residents who have lost nearly everything they owned to tourists whose holiday dreams have been devastated and who want little more than to go back home. In the awful aftermath of California's killer quake, folks are giving thanks for the emergency medical trauma system set up in the San Francisco area. CNN's medical correspondent Gary Schweitzer reports on one aspect of dealing with disaster.
Only 25% of the U.S. population is currently covered by emergency trauma care systems. Fortunately, one of the first and one of the strongest trauma systems was established in San Francisco 23 years ago.
Well, they've been preparing for a number of years for this particular disaster. Each hospital has a disaster plan that has been put into effect that has worked extremely smoothly out in the San Francisco area.
Clearly, the geography of the area taxes such a system during a natural disaster, and it hits an emergency medical system already overburdened in providing day-to-day care.
But what happens in a disaster is the trauma system is taxed again. You have the disaster, the people caught in the bridge, the people caught for 1 to 2 days who are still alive, the immediate, the people who have simple fractures and chest injuries. These are people you see that tax the system. And then again, a third tax comes to the system when the people who are having heart attacks due to the stress, other factors, medical, just everyday medical problems come into your system again.
Dougal and Associates have formed an emergency medical service company which has responded to earthquakes in Mexico City, El Salvador, and Armenia. In those cases, damage was so great that medical care in the field was inadequate.
What happens, you have a simple fracture, a broken bone, you have a simple abrasion that isn't treated right away, turns into an infection, and we had some resulting amputations due to simple things that weren't seen right away.
But he says there's a difference between those countries' earthquakes and this one.
You were talking about countries that aren't, that have a problem prior to the disaster. And then they lose all their water system, they lose all their communication system, and they lose all their housing. It's a little different here in the United States.
It's still possible that some infectious disease problems could arise if the earthquake or aftershocks disturbed water lines running parallel to sewer lines. But infections like hepatitis wouldn't show up for weeks. One other area of concern, and perhaps the hardest to pin down, is the psychological effect of such a natural disaster. Post-traumatic stress disorder, the psychiatric disorder commonly associated with war veterans, is also the diagnosis sometimes made in survivors of natural disasters. Among the ways it's seen, distressing recollections of the event by day, recurrent bad dreams by night, flashbacks, and intense distress when the person is exposed to any reminder of the quake, even on an anniversary of the event.
We're still seeing it in Armenia. We still see Mexico. I went back to Mexico City, and we still see the people there having some of the trauma, sleepless nights, different patterns, some of the nightmares that they do have. It's very important. It's a real aspect that has to be addressed.
So the long-term mental health effort may have to match the strong emergency medical response already seen short-term. Gary Schweitzer, CNN, reporting.
When the world today continues, we'll take a look at some of the other stories making news today and continue our extensive coverage of the earthquake disaster in San Francisco. Around the world today, there is other news. Erich Honecker is out as the hardline communist leader of East Germany after 18 years. His iron-fisted regime stretches back to the building of the Berlin Wall. Diplomats say he's being replaced by another hardliner, Egon Kranz. Honecker steps down, saying his health had deteriorated. His political health was jeopardized by widespread demonstrations with thousands of East Germans demanding democracy. And in recent weeks, thousands more have fled the country for a new life in the West. In Hungary, more movement toward democracy. The parliament in Budapest approved constitutional amendments creating a democratic system of government. The amendments also call for free election by next summer. They passed parliament by an overwhelming margin, and the name of the country itself was changed to the Republic of Hungary. After 40 years, the one-party system is history in Hungary.
The calls for political and economic reform in the communist world are often resulting in violence and death. As we continue our special series, Waging Peace, CNN's Larry Lamont reports the search for a new way of life can be a dangerous one.
Led by the Pied Piper of reform, communism is undergoing a historic metamorphosis. Inside and outside the communist world, people appear eager to embrace the struggle to tear down repression and build up freedom.
Reform is a much too tame a word to be using. We should be using the word revolution.
New voices are rising from the shipyards and parliament of Poland to the streets of Hungary, to the coal mines of the Soviet Union, demanding more liberties and getting them. And while those same voices have been silenced in China, the pressure to reform a rigid, unyielding system is still strong.
I think communism has failed across the board. It doesn't work even by its own standards. It doesn't deliver the goods.
But with this dramatic transformation come new threats of turmoil and bloodshed that is destabilizing the communist world, posing a greater danger to the entire planet.
We have to prevent bloodletting. We have to prevent civil war from breaking out. The revolution from below has started in the form of strikes.
A revolution created because of the failure of an earlier revolution. Over 70 years of Marxism is now unable to provide basic goods and services and fundamental freedoms. Today, thousands are fleeing the system.
Today, we have an economic crisis, financial crisis. The nationality question is in a state of crisis. The living standard is in a state of crisis. The social sphere is in a crisis. 48 million people live below the poverty line.
When Soviet observers themselves talk about the danger of civil war, talk about the danger of armed coups, talk about the danger of chaos within the society, and we know what we know subjectively about the Soviet Union, we have to take such a possibility seriously.
It looked like civil war in the Republic of Georgia in April. Anti-Russian demonstrators pitted against Soviet troops. 20 Georgians were killed, the violent price of allowing freedom of expression for the first time. Even more trouble is expected from the more than 100 ethnic groups in the Soviet Union. Many are volatile. 15 have their own republics. In the past, the ethnic nations were restrained by fear and power. Now, once suppressed emotions have been unleashed in the form of strife and demands for secession. The supporters of reform believe this pain is a prerequisite to progress.
The USA, Americans, the West in general, they understand that the path to democracy is a very difficult and a painful one. And it's only natural to go through all these hardships and try to transform itself.
But critics say the violence and unrest prove democratization has gone too far and will force Mikhail Gorbachev to revert to the way it used to be.
He will engage in selective repression, particularly against nationalism within those republics which pose the gravest geopolitical challenge to the Soviet Union.
Reform often creates a kind of system or a kind of disunity and a kind of instability that to many people seems worse than the system they were trying to reform.
The Pied Piper himself concedes his reforms are in trouble. He told the Supreme Soviet last year that to make progress, the Soviet people must pull together. Instead, there is growing national mistrust, growing conflict as the reforms inch forward. In China, when reform shook the foundation of communism in Tiananmen Square this summer, it was quickly brought to a standstill. New freedoms crushed the old-fashioned way. New ideas rejected.
Before we hoped that there will be a Gorbachev in China, but now this hope is vanished.
I think there's a real struggle going on within the Chinese leadership, really for the soul of China. And I don't think it's a lost cause for the reformers by any means.
I have to say that the 40 years ruling of the Communist Party in mainland China is a failure.
A failure to accomplish its goals for economic progress. A failure to make the dramatic changes taking place in the Soviet bloc. But a success at iron-fisted peace. For China, stability appears more important for now than the uncertainty and unrest that come with reform.
Reform carries with it instabilities that have to be managed. And if they're not well managed, they can become dangerous.
This is a deeply rooted historical process which will continue unfolding before our eyes for the next decade or so.
The reforms in all the blocs and also in China, they must come. The problem is price. Price is the issue.
That price is high, with the likelihood of further violence and turmoil in the communist world. But with its people slipping deeper into poverty and demanding a better way of life, there is little choice but to pay the bill. Larry Lamott, CNN.
We can now continue our coverage of the earthquake in San Francisco. Joining us live from the Marina District in San Francisco is correspondent Don Knapp. Don, what can you tell us?
Catherine, what's happening here now is the heavy equipment is moving in. It is some 22 hours now since the earthquake first struck, and what you're watching behind me is the heavy equipment moving in for the first time to begin the demolition effort. The building you're looking at was a 4-story apartment building in the heart of the Marina District. Only 2 stories remain above ground. The bottom 2 stories have been crushed. There are some 20 buildings in San Francisco that look very much like this. Apartment buildings in the Marina District that have been knocked down and look similar to this. There are in San Francisco 40 buildings that the police and fire department have determined are uninhabitable, where people can't live until major repairs are done. We expect this building to be torn down sometime soon. We'll be here live for you when that happens. Right now, let's take a look at reporter Craig Heap's work in this area a little bit earlier today. Here's his report.
By light of day, the devastation was astounding. In the Marina District, just east of the Golden Gate Bridge, fire destroyed a dozen buildings overnight. Firefighters were still pouring water on the rubble at mid-morning. Apartment buildings slid from their foundations. Some collapsed, the lower floors giving way and buckling under the upper floors. Rescue workers using dogs search for survivors and victims. This is Indian summer in San Francisco, the warmest time of year here, and people poured out onto the streets once it was daylight to come and see the damage.
I saw it last night, and we wanted to come down in daylight to see what it looked like, and it was even worse than daylight, I'll tell you.
I just think it's terrifying. It's just absolutely terrifying. I want to see what happens. I heard about it last night, but I had no idea.
What did you think now that you've seen it?
It's incredible. It's really frightening.
With all the years we've been here, through all the earthquakes we have, this is the roughest, by far.
Many were forced to leave their homes and stay in shelters. The National Guard has been sent in to help police and medical personnel. Everywhere in the marina there are signs of the quake's stunning force. Buckled sidewalks, streets exploded by water mains, brick facades knocked to the ground. The Marina District is without electricity and may be one of the last areas in San Francisco to have its power restored. That's because there are so many gas leaks. Officials are afraid that turning on the electricity might touch off a fire or an explosion. The Bay Bridge is still closed. Its east end collapsed in one part. The search for bodies continues along the double-decker Cypress section of Interstate 880 in Oakland, where the upper deck collapsed Tuesday night, crushing and killing scores of rush-hour commuters. Officials believe there are no survivors remaining between the freeway decks. The rescue efforts will continue for days, the cleanup and repairs for months. Craig Heaps for CNN, San Francisco.
As Craig said, power and gas are off, but there is a water supply and there is a sanitation system working. It will probably be days, weeks, perhaps months before we know the full extent of the enormity of what has happened here. Reporting live at San Francisco's Marina District, Don Knapp for CNN.
Don, a question. Is the concern about aftershocks and the structural instability there in Marina hampering those rescue and relief efforts?
Yes, of course, that is one of the major problems. They have waited for structural engineers to come here to look at the buildings to see if they were safe to enter or even safe to demolish. And we don't know if we're going to have an aftershock or if the quake we had was a foreshock of an even bigger quake. That's one of the things being talked about. So the aftershock question is a valid one, and it's one of the things they're concerned about.
Thank you, Don. Correspondent Don Knapp reporting from the Marina area in San Francisco. The World Today continues in just a moment.
The seaside resort of Santa Cruz lies just a few miles from the epicenter of the earthquake. Many of its historic Victorian homes now lie in rubble, and at least 5 people are reported dead. CNN's Dan Blackburn was among the first outsiders to enter Santa Cruz to survey the destruction.
Emergency vehicles heading into the mountainous terrain near the earthquake's epicenter provided us with a temporary escort as we set forth towards Santa Cruz, a town all but isolated by the quake. Soon, however, we hit a police roadblock halting all traffic. It didn't take long to discover why. Boulders were strewn across the road, and deep cracks had been ripped in the pavement. The road is not likely to be reopened soon. An alternate route took us to a hilltop evacuation center, where Linda and Alan Freeman were searching for their 2 young daughters. At first, it looked as though their efforts to find the children would be in vain. Then, someone suggested they look in a van nearby. Amid the hugs and happy smiles, Linda Freeman gave credit to her neighbors.
Everyone at the hospital told me that the community would come through and take care of them, that I shouldn't worry, and they did.
Back on the road, it still was slow going. Amid the earthquake debris and downed power lines and trees. Glowing embers were all that remained of one house. In Santa Cruz itself, at least 2 people died when some older buildings in a shopping mall collapsed. Electricity was knocked out, but much of the damage here was centralized.
Dan Blackburn, CNN, Santa Cruz, California.
The shambles from an earthquake. The digging out goes on.
From CNN, this is The World Today with Bernard Shaw in Washington and Catherine Crier from CNN Center in Atlanta.
Work crews say there's no hope anyone will be found alive in the rubble of an elevated highway in Oakland. At least 270 people are dead, 1,400 hurt, after that killer quake in the San Francisco Bay Area. Most of the victims died when that highway came crashing down. CNN's Robert Vito has a situation report.
San Franciscans spent the night in shock and fear after the worst earthquake that hit this city in 83 years. By daybreak, the digging out for survivors and bodies began. The scene was repeated over and over. Firemen crawled in and out of the debris, searching for victims. Some couldn't believe they were looking at the aftermath of the worst earthquake the city has seen since 1906, when San Francisco was virtually destroyed by fire.
I saw it last night, and wanted to come down in daylight to see what it looked like, and it was even worse than daylight, I'll tell you.
I just think it's terrifying.
It's just like a bad movie. It's like things you see in the movies. It's hard to believe it's real.
In the East Bay area, several oil storage tanks ruptured, sending thousands of gallons of oil into the bay. The White House dispatched Vice President Dan Quayle to tour the devastation.
We want to take care of the people that have lost their home, have lost their property, have loss of life. Certainly. That is our immediate attention.
In all, the city wasn't its busy, hectic south, but some tried to make the best of a bad situation.
I think people will get beyond this and they'll come back to work and we'll go back to living.
City officials say they will get San Francisco back to normal soon, but some here believe that with such widespread devastation, it won't be soon at all. Robert Vito, CNN, San Francisco.
The word earthquake conjures up shocking images, the kind most people hope to never see. But earthquakes are not unusual in nature. CNN's Charles Crawford reports the quake that hit San Francisco yesterday is the result of a process that never ends.
This is what the normal tracing on a seismograph looks like. And this is what it looked like when the California quake struck. The event signaled the release of enormous energies along the San Andreas Fault. This major fault runs from Mexico through the entire state of California. A fault is the boundary where two large tectonic plates of the Earth's crust meet. About a dozen of these plates cover the Earth. The plates gradually shift position, typically about an inch or so every year. The same sort of movement is going on along the San Andreas Fault. Friction tries to hold the plates together. Gradually, the forces between the North American and Pacific plates build up. Eventually, something has to give. When it does, an earthquake occurs. If a quake has not occurred for a long time in the area, as was the case at the epicenter north of Santa Cruz, the jolt is more likely to be extremely powerful.
It's significantly greater than any atomic bomb that's ever been released. The energy that exists, the stress energy, is something that accumulates and is released on a continual basis, so it's a restorable type force, so that we can expect a repeat of earthquakes through the years.
Invariably, there are aftershocks following a major earthquake. These are smaller quakes that normally occur because not all the energy stored up over the years was released with the first shock.
You can expect to see one magnitude around 5.5 or 5, probably 10 or so magnitude 4s, and increasing numbers of magnitude 3s and 2s, extensive number of those events. That would be typical. Most of those will occur in the next 2 to 4 weeks.
Long says it appears there was movement over about a 20-mile stretch of the San Andreas Fault. Unfortunately, it also appears the quake may not have relieved pressures that continue to build in the immediate San Francisco area.
The actual rupture length probably did not reach up into San Francisco, so there is a significant portion of that fault going up towards San Francisco, which is still locked or has not moved and liable for another earthquake.
Although this was the strongest quake along the San Andreas Fault since 1906, a number of scientists say the big one is yet to come. And hopefully data from the current tremors will improve the accuracy of determining when and where the next seismic event will occur. Catherine?
Charles, we've all seen the horror and devastation of an earthquake of this magnitude, but how unusual really is such an earthquake?
They're really a lot more frequent than we might suspect. The seismologists tell us that on the order of 6.0 magnitude, one less than struck California, there are about 100 of those a year, and on the size that did strike California, 7.0 or 6.9, there are roughly 20 to 24 of those a year. The reason we aren't aware of them is many of them strike in very remote areas that are not populated.
We've been discussing the effect of aftershocks, and certainly they are of a lesser magnitude than the earthquake itself. What are the real major concerns about the aftershocks?
The chances of an aftershock are quite good. In fact, probably on the order of 5 to 5.5, according to the seismologists. But the biggest concern, now that's considerably less, of course, than struck California, but the big concern is what will that secondary shock do to the infrastructures, i.e. the bridges and the roads that have already been enormously weakened along with the buildings?
Dr. Long mentioned in the piece we just saw that the actual rupture did not reach San Francisco. At what risk is San Francisco right now in regards to another earthquake?
This brings up the interesting, what's called the gap theory. And it is a theory, but it goes like this. If you have an earthquake at a particular point along the San Andreas Fault, the likelihood of another quake is more likely at that same point. And the longer the time period between the first and the next quake, the more buildup in pressure is and the more powerful that quake will be. This rupture did not, apparently, it appears, did not go all the way to San Francisco. Therefore, San Francisco may be under the same kind of risk that it was the day before yesterday, before the quake struck.
Thank you, Charles. And with that, we will return after this break.
Now we go to CNN correspondent Greg Lamont for a situation update in Oakland.
Well, Bernie, we traveled late last night to San Jose. There we found minimal damage. There was a lot of power outages all over the place, but that was about it. Then we headed off for Santa Cruz. In Santa Cruz, there was substantial damage in the area. It's located about 7 miles to the east of the epicenter, and there was substantial damage, especially in the downtown area, where buildings in a mall collapsed, and we got reports of anywhere from 2 to 8 people being killed, although those numbers were never quite confirmed. There were power outages there. There were also phone outages as well. But when we arrived in Oakland, the site of this upper deck freeway crumbled down upon the bottom lower freeway. This was, without a question of a doubt, by far the single greatest devastation that we had seen from this earthquake. Up to 1.5 miles, if you can imagine, of the upper deck collapsed under the strength of the 6.9 earthquake. The Nimitz Freeway, the one that collapsed, was built originally in 1955, but it was upgraded in 1972, allegedly to be able to withstand an earthquake, but obviously the 6.9 was too much for it. It also occurred during the wrong time, during rush hour, when there was stalled traffic in the lanes for 1.5 miles. 7 people have been confirmed dead. That's what the police have told us all day long. But they have told us that they have spotted more bodies in the rubble that have yet to be removed. And they say that the death toll could go as high as 200. Sad stories are starting to come in on this tragic event. They are beginning to emerge. 2 young children were pulled out of the back seat of their car that was crushed. They had been in it for several hours. In the front seat were their dead parents. There was another youngster, 6 years old, who had to have his leg amputated so that he could be removed from the crushed car that he was in. At this hour, the effort to remove bodies has begun in earnest. Police dogs have been sniffing the disaster area all day. Special cranes and equipment have been brought in what will definitely be a very delicate operation. To give you an example of how scared these people are of something more happening with this freeway, they've put an air restriction into effect, which means that non-essential flying personnel, other than the military craft that you can hear behind me, can fly within 2 miles, or I take that back, 2,000 feet or 5 miles of it. That's how concerned they are about the vibrations. The people here in Oakland are saying that this bridge, or not bridge, but freeway has been destroyed so badly that they don't want it to be repaired now. They just want it to be rebuilt. They want a new one. Greg Lamont, CNN Live, Oakland.
Thanks very much, Greg. Ahead, more coverage of the California earthquake the day after, when the world today continues. President Bush says the federal government will take every step to help the earthquake victims. He signed a disaster declaration, and he wants to visit the Bay Area. CNN senior White House correspondent Charles Bierbauer joins us now with details. Charles?
President Bush will fly to the San Francisco Bay Area on Friday to get a first-hand look at the earthquake damage. He's expected to take a helicopter tour and meet with California Governor George Deukmejian. White House officials are trying to determine now just how much the president can see without hampering relief efforts.
And I want to be
considerate of the fact that when I do go someplace, it could be slightly disruptive, so I will have the timing that it will not get in the way of people that are busily doing their job right now.
Bush was criticized for taking over a week to get to South Carolina after Hurricane Hugo hit. The president quickly signed a disaster declaration authorizing federal aid to 7 California counties that could provide grants, temporary housing, and low-interest loans to cover uninsured loss of property. White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater says $273 million in unallocated funds originally earmarked for relief from Hurricane Hugo would be immediately available. Fitzwater says when that money runs out, the government will have to look for more for both the earthquake and Hugo. Vice President Dan Quayle and Transportation Secretary Samuel Skinner provided the president with the first on-scene reports.
Just walking through here and seeing the loss of property, knowing of the loss of life, it hits you right here in the heart.
But Bush went to the command center at FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, for an assessment.
Jeff is the president. How is it doing out there? What are you getting a lot of requests for emergency medical service? Good.
FEMA is coordinating federal aid to California.
The state is up and running. This is one of the best prepared states in the United States to deal with this issue.
FEMA also drew fire for reacting too slowly to Hurricane Hugo.
Well, I hope there will be less carping. I thought that the response to Hugo was very good.
The president's reaction time this time drew praise.
I commend President Bush on his prompt response.
Bush referred to the earthquake throughout the day.
I know it's a matter of national concern, this disaster that hit yesterday.
President Bush has received messages of sympathy from Mikhail Gorbachev and other world leaders, Thatcher, Kohl, Mubarak, Gandhi. There is also an offer of aid from the Soviet Union. U.S. officials are saying thanks, but they think they can do the job without foreign assistance. Bernie?
Charles, how sensitive is this White House to being off the mark quickly and being on top of things?
Well, you heard the president say that he hoped there wouldn't be any carping this time around. 2 incidents have cropped up in his short tenure already. 1, the Alaska oil spill, and 2, Hurricane Hugo, in which people, particularly on the scene in South Carolina, out in Alaska, felt that the administration reacted too slowly. Certainly that was not the case. As soon as the president heard last night, he sprang into action and got the wheels rolling. So there seems to be at least an alertness here to the fact that people thought he was slow that time. They don't want that to happen again.
Thank you, Charles. If you would like to help the earthquake victims, the Red Cross is taking calls at 1-800-453-9000. And the Red Cross is asking that you please send money, not supplies.
Insurance companies expect more than $1 billion in claims from the quake. Across the state of California, only about 20% of all homeowners have earthquake insurance. One reason is that it's expensive, and there's often a 10% deductible. However, in the San Francisco area, companies are required to offer quake coverage to homeowners buying comprehensive insurance coverage. Aftershocks from the quake rumbled through world financial markets. CNN's Lou Dobbs has more on that from our business news desk in New York. Lou?
Catherine, thank you. The Dow Jones Industrials today ending with modest gains, a fairly calm trading day. The earthquake in California did trigger some early selling, but investors snapped up stocks and insurance, construction and building materials, and that improved the market's breadth. The Dow Jones Industrials closing higher, up almost 5 points, up 4.92. The Dow tonight at 2,643.65. Volume, heavy trading, almost 167 million shares, and advancing issues did beat out decliners by a margin of about 4-3. The 30-year Treasury bond also up slightly. The dollar was lower. And a reminder to join us for Moneyline. We'll have a complete wrap-up for you on the economic and financial impact of the San Francisco earthquake, and a wrap-up, of course, of all the day's events on Wall Street. Tonight on Moneyline, 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Pacific, right here on CNN. Once again, the Dow closing with a gain of 5 points. From the Business News Desk here in New York, I'm Lou Dobbs.
Thank you, Lou. There are other stories making news in the nation today. We'll have that in continuing coverage of the earthquake in San Francisco when the World Today continues. It seems all eyes are on San Francisco today, but there is other news to tell you about, including the perfect launch of the space shuttle Atlantis. We go to CNN's John Zarella for a report.
The weather played games with NASA again on Wednesday. At the Kennedy Space Center, clouds billowed and rolled across the sky. At transatlantic emergency abort sites, rain and haze threatened to force the space agency to cancel its third attempt to launch the shuttle Atlantis. The countdown was taken down to 5 minutes and held while the launch team waited for clearance to fly. Moments later, they got it.
We have a go on tail weather with Zaragoza, which we're configuring to at this time. RTLS is also go, so we're go for launch.
Copy. Or you go then to pick up the clock at 5.
As the clock ticked down, final checks of the system were made. Other than the weather, the countdown was near perfect.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition and liftoff of Atlantis and the Galileo spacecraft bound for Jupiter.
Cheers went up in the firing room as Atlantis headed skyward, an emotion that will always spill over at liftoff.
It's a great moment. It takes so much effort from so many people, and there's so much adrenaline that people are going to be human.
Anti-nuclear protesters had threatened to infiltrate the launch site, but that never materialized. Their concern was the cargo on board Atlantis, the $1.4 billion nuclear-powered Galileo spacecraft destined for Jupiter. It is the most sophisticated probe ever built. Scientists say the data and pictures it will send back will make the recent images from Voyager look like a sideshow.
Voyager was like trying to read a book from the top of the Empire State Building, and Galileo is like picking up the books and holding it in your hands. That's the difference in resolution.
It will take Galileo 6 years to reach Jupiter. From here on, NASA's launch schedule picks up dramatically. 2 more before the end of the year. A secret Department of Defense mission in November, and a 10-day Christmas mission to deploy a satellite and retrieve another. John Zarella, CNN, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
To observe a natural disaster, like the earthquake in San Francisco, is to detect a certain pattern. CNN's Mark Leff explains.
There is a rhythm to these life and death dramas, whether on the streets of San Francisco, or the shores of South Carolina, or the high plateau between Mexican mountains. First, the shock and fear from a personal perspective.
So it was very scary. People running everywhere.
The whole top of the building fell off and landed right on top of these cars. There were people in them, and I guess they didn't feel the thing. They were just crushed to death. I mean, it's like pancakes.
Then a glimpse of the magnitude of the disaster, and then efforts to reduce it to numbers.
It could reach 7, but right now we have a 6.9. And when you talk about great earthquakes, you're talking about 8.0 and above.
As I understand it as of right now, is 7 confirmed bodies.
The Bay Bridge is, we estimate, closure for about 20 days.
I can tell you it's going to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars for San Francisco.
Numbers, a way for many to measure what a relative few felt, will loom large in coming days. How many dead in the East Bay communities that are almost as cut off now from San Francisco as they were 83 years ago? Comparing this quake with that quake, how many dead, how many dispossessed, how much insurance companies will have to pay to the percentage of people who had appropriate policies, and how much insurers already counting the cost of other recent disasters will eventually profit or lose. But the human dramas will continue behind the numbers, as they always do. There were so-called miracle babies in Mexico in 1985. Already, there is word of children pulled alive from crushed cars in Oakland after losing their families and, in some cases, their limbs. And in the natural rhythm of disaster, soon, in hours or days that can be measured, there will be funerals. Soon, in days or weeks or years that cannot, there will be another quake in California, and the cycle will begin again. Mark Leff, CNN, reporting.
And that's the world today. At the CNN Center in Atlanta, I'm Catherine Crier.
And I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington. Moneyline is next with a look at the still uncalculated economic impact of the California quake.